Our State of the U.S. segment tonight, liberals pride themselves on tolerance. So why are they shutting down political events because they disagree with them? A new study has found opposition to conservative events has tripled since President Trump took office. But these aren't just peaceful protests. No. The left is now using violence to shut down opposition. With me now, National Chairman of the Young America's Foundation, Grant Strobl. Grant, thanks for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
All right, Grant, this is a pretty interesting poll that you guys at the Young America's Foundation have commissioned. You looked at, I guess, the numbers of how many events of yours that you hosted, you sponsored, were disrupted during the election year and compared that to how many were disrupted the prior year. Tell me about what you found.
Well, look, this has been a long time coming. The left has been disrupting events for years. But before the election of President Donald Trump, that number was only at 15%. Now we found, after the election of Donald Trump, believe it or not, 46% of our events are either disrupted by protesters, stifled by administrators, or are outright canceled. And that is really startling. It is a huge threat to the freedom of expression. And it really needs to end if we're going to continue to have peaceful dialogue in this country.
Right, that's absolutely insane. I mean, that's more than 300%. 15% of your events before the election, now 46%. And Grant, I mean, the troubling part is, and I guess this is stating the obvious, these are not just peaceful protesters. These are not just people with different political opinions that also want to bring their talking points to the table. I mean, these are issues like UC Berkeley, where violence shut down Ann Coulter, which you guys were actually connected to before that all went down. I mean, the left is they're justifying this violence against conservative viewpoints just because they don't agree with conservatives politically.
Well, look, they're using this as the heckler's veto. They are using this violence to scare administrators into basically canceling these events. That's exactly what happened at UC Berkeley. UC Berkeley implemented a high-profile speakers policy, so-called high-profile speaker policy, only used twice against two conservatives, David Horowitz and Ann Coulter. And this is why we're leading the lawsuit against UC Berkeley, because what they are doing is absolutely unconstitutionally discriminatory. This needs to change. And what's underlying all of this? According to our poll, 53% of college students, 53%, equate words or not using words with violence. And you wonder why all of this craziness is going on campus, because these students think that using or not using words is violent. It's absolutely absurd.
It's ridiculous. I mean, I don't know where they grew up, but where I grew up, we were taught sticks and stones may hurt your bones, but words would never hurt you. The counterpart to the 53% of students who think words constitute an act of violence is, and you'll know the exact number here, but I believe it was 28% of students on college campuses don't feel concerned with the censorship of ideas. That in and of itself, I mean, it's mind-boggling given what we see every day.
Well, yeah, they don't care because the administrators are on their side. The professors are on their side. They have nothing to be afraid of, because when ideas are censored on campus, it's conservative ideas. They don't care about conservative ideas. And that's really the problem in academia today, is that there is no diversity of thought. And that is what Young America's Foundation and Young Americans for Freedom is trying to do. We're trying to host speakers on campuses throughout the country, so that way students, maybe for the first time in their lives, get to listen to a conservative speaker. That's a magical thing. Imagine that. There's a lot of students first time in their lives listening to a conservative. This is really highlighting the huge problem that we have in our universities that we're trying to change. And it all comes down to the students. Students need to stand up if we're going to see change.
Right, and it shows it's pathetic in a sense, the deficiency in our education system, that students could get all the way to college. They could graduate 12th grade and not having heard conservative political talking points because it's eradicated. Liberals don't want that to be a part of their education. They don't want to expose them to other points of view, because then, of course, it would be too tempting for students to choose to be Republicans, which would be counter to the progressive agenda of indoctrinating students at all. Grant, what this culturally leads to, this is perhaps the most shocking statistic that came from your poll, is that 1 in 5 students, 20% of students on campus, are afraid to express their opinions.
Yes, that is really scary. And this is why if there's one thing that they can take away from Young America's Foundation, is that you should not be scared to express your opinion. Every time a conservative silences themselves because of the feeling of oppression from the left on campus, the left wins. Conservatives need to speak out and stand up, which is why I encourage them to be in contact with Young America's Foundation, because we can help you. We can provide the resources to host speakers, host activism events, and when universities get in the way, we can help you defend your conservative ideas. That's the only way we're going to solve this.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's almost a boots on the ground, peacefully type of strategy here. You got to fight back. You can't be afraid, and you can't be afraid to go outside of that narrow-minded realm of groupthink and think differently. If you notice that liberals are justifying political violence, if you look at Antifa and say they shouldn't be looting, they shouldn't be burning, they shouldn't be throwing rocks at police officers and vandalizing and breaking glass and punching Trump supporters, and you hear the left justifying that, if you see the same thing from the Black Lives Matter movement, if you hear liberals defending Kathy Griffin after she held up the fake severed head of President Trump, if you see the New York Public Theater mocking or staging a mock assassination of President Trump, and you hear liberal commentators on liberal networks calling it a beautiful piece of work, and you think to yourself, that's justifying violence. That's making our culture more violent. Don't be afraid to speak up. Don't be afraid to stand up. There are other people like you. Grant, you guys are doing great work. I appreciate you being on the show today.